Good evening. Welcome to the May 4 Thursday edition of the Tuesday Selectmen's meeting this week. We accommodated a colleague's travel schedule. We want to remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded and that we'd like to just take a moment of appreciation for our troops serving around the world. Thank you. Let's see, we are very pleased to congratulate the high school jazz choir earning the gold medal award at the recent Massachusetts Jazz Education Festival. The Medfield High School Jazz Band earned a gold award at the March 18 Festival for Big Bands. Both groups will perform at the Boston Hatch Shell Sunday, May 14. First time in a number of years, two of the ensembles have earned gold awards in the same year. We certainly have a very successful music program in town. We're starting tonight with the Medfield Energy Committee has come to Fred Bunger, Chair of the Energy Committee, has a citation.
Good evening.
And a check.
First things first. In 2008, the Select Board had the foresight to charter an energy committee with the goal of saving energy for the town. And since then, the Energy Committee has, along with the diligent effort of all the town departments, of course, managed to cut more than 30% off the town energy bill. So it's paid off. About 5 years ago, the Energy Committee, feeling that Medfield was being a very environmentally conscious community, decided to go to the Department of Energy Resources and apply to become a green community under the Department of Energy Resources designation. And now, through the diligent work, again, of the town departments and the Energy Committee, we've been given the designation as a green community, and with that, a certificate from Governor Baker, and I was at a ceremony about a month ago in Brockton to receive that. With that, we have another payoff, and this is a big check from the Department of Energy Resources for the town to spend $146,815 for energy improvement projects that will be starting this year and extending into next year. So congratulations to the Select Board for chartering the Energy Committee. The Energy Committee is very proud to be part of the town. So.
Fred, thank you so much for all of your hard work and for the Energy Committee's hard work. What a wonderful return.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're still paying off. Thank you.
Does Pete endorse the check? Is he the?
I think you can try to cash it.
Thanks, Ron.
It has to come with a designated project, which our Energy Committee and the facility manager are working on.
The check is in the mail, but we can't cash
The
it.
check is in the, well, check.
Oh, no, that one, that one. He just needs one of those big magic markers.
Next, we have Medfield Lions member Ron Gustafson. Request permission to hold the annual Lions Toll Booth fundraiser Saturday, May 13. Thank you.
Yes, I'm the Medfield Lions project chair for the toll booth for site, which is pretty much an annual spring event we try to do for 3 hours on a Saturday in May. And the money is earmarked for the Mass Lions Eye Research Fund. This year, our club will donate a bit over $5,000 to the Mass Lions Eye Research Fund. Some of the numbers, the Mass Lions Eye Research Fund has been in existence since 1953 and has donated well over $30 million to local Boston area research institutions. This year, these years, we donate about, the Massachusetts Lions raise about $1 million a year for this fund. And so the locations on May 13th, Saturday, if we do it, will be at the corner of Main and North Street, in front of the Bank of America, in front of Needham Bank, down in front of Blue Moon and outside the swap area to the, at the transfer station. Still securing, we have to talk to the Friedmans and get their permission, and I spoke to Bob Meany. And so we're looking to do it if we can on May 13th, Saturday, May 13th, from 9 to noon. That's it.
And since you do it every year, Ron, I'm assuming there's no problem with the police chief on this?
I think
Chief
we're
says
good.
fine, so.
Yeah.
Any questions from the board?
Can't argue with the class of '72.
That's
We'll be in school together.
Right,
Really
county.
nice.
Well, I would move then that we authorize the Medfield Lions to conduct their Lions toll booth on Saturday, May 13th from 9 a.m. to noon at the corner of North and Main Street and at the swap area at the transfer station.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Nope.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
Thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Ron. Next, we have, I guess we should probably, not until 7:15 do we have our next appointment, so that, let's see, we have an opportunity for citizen comment.
Anybody sign in?
Don't know.
No.
Action items. Selectmen are requested to vote to authorize town administrator to sign the Chapter 90 10-year contract.
Yeah, Mo's here, he can probably explain that better than I can, so let him.
Good evening. The Chapter 90, every 10 years, we have a contract to expend the funds for Chapter 90. So the state requires us to sign a master service agreement every 10 years for that Chapter 90 allotments. So it's just a formality for us to contract with the state for the Chapter 90 money. So, and it expires the June 30th of this year.
Is that an intense negotiation with the state?
No,
A lot of back and forth?
No, they just they want to give us money and we'll spend it. So.
It's a say, form contract everybody signs,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Any questions? Do we have a motion?
I would move that we authorize the town administrator to sign the new Chapter 90 10-year contract beginning July 1st, 2017.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
And Mo, what was the allocation for this year? Was it
$394,000,
so,
somewhere around there.
and that's for 1 year, so if you multiply that by 10, it's a good thing.
Maybe, Mo, while you're here, maybe you could just bring us up to date on North Street, how we're, because we keep hearing that that's going to happen, and it just keeps seeming to get pushed farther and farther away.
So I've been dealing with the MPO for North Street. They do have us on a list, but we are pretty far down because we get rated on the different criteria that we fulfill, whether it's economic development, complete streets. There's a lot of different things. So we're competing against a lot of larger cities and towns, but they do have a caveat in there that allows smaller towns to receive funding, but we seem to be pushed back a little bit every year. So I am working with an engineering company who had been part of this project. We're pushing this a little forward with the design, trying to finish up all the design requirements that the state had about, I think, 5 years ago. Once that's complete, we're going to submit that and try to get to the public hearing stage. Once we get to the public hearing stage, we're more apt to get pushed up further. I'm going to be, I've been dealing with the MPO, I've been dealing with Mass DOT, so it's just a process that we have to go through that I know it's been a long time. We are looking to do some improvements on the other end of North Street towards the Dover line, but I know our main concern is the North Street going into the center, but it's a $2.4 million ticket, and we just don't have that funding for Chapter 90. With $394,000, we are trying to, it'll take many years for us to at least finish that. And I am working on 109, a couple bridge projects to put that on the tip as well. So it's just a little battle, but
So in general, Mike, do we spend the Chapter 90 money as it comes in, or do we bank some of it?
We generally accumulate it, and Mo is putting together a list of the funds that we have available now. I think it's about $1 million we have right now.
right.
And he'll get that to you, and then you can take a look at it, and
But we are
he'll give
developing a
his
pavement,
priorities.
we are developing a pavement management system.
Oh, excellent.
And so after this spring, we should have something in place for next construction season, so we can base our what we do have a little bit more information to see how we make our decisions. So, but
I know that when I saw you at the Mass Municipal Association annual meeting, we were in front of a vendor that I thought was really useful and interesting, and I don't remember what it was now, but I remember thinking that I should talk to you. Well, I'll figure out what it was. Bring it up with you. But
Yep.
Okay, I have a much more smaller scale question. I fielded a question over the weekend from someone who asked if we had a sidewalk construction repair process or sequence, because he was
In-
particularly interested.
In our
Obviously.
pavement management program, we're gonna have an element of sidewalk reconstruction. We have, right now this year, we are working on the Metacomet sidewalk going towards the schools. So that's one of the projects we're gonna be doing in-house, but it all depends on the Chapter 90 allotments and how much money we have extras to kind of take care of important things. And the idea of the pavement management system is to keep the good streets good. And, you know, there are a lot of streets that need dire repair, but it all depends on what's the best bang for the buck for the town.
So if somebody wanted to know about their particular sidewalk, which is what this person wanted to
Yep.
know about, recognizing that you may not know exactly when you do it, is there a place they can go that tells them that you are 3,000 sidewalks from the top of the pile, or 3?
Once we get the pavement management system, I'll better understand where everything falls into place, and I can give that, any requests, I can give that information.
In the time frame for that?
They're gonna be starting this spring to do inventory of the roads and give us a roadway surface rating for each of the roadways, and give us the distresses on the roads, and also the kind of the methodologies to use on these roadways. But it's gonna change from year to year because of, after the winters, different things happen to the roadways. But it's gonna give us a good idea of which roadways should be taken into consideration and what methods to do on them.
So when you talk about a system, is it a system as a process of inspecting roads, or is a system a database or something?
It's a database after they inspect all the roadways and they engineer and they survey everything, and then we get a good idea of what we have in town and what our needs are. They're gonna give us a baseline of how much roadway repair. And in previous town that I've worked for, we found that we had a $20 million deficit in roadway infrastructure to get everything to 100%. We had a roadway rating, I believe, of 74. But to keep that 74 roadway rating amongst the town, you have to spend a certain amount of money. The Chapter 90 allotment is not enough to satisfy that. So if you want to stay at the 74 rating, you have to spend a certain amount. If you spend less, your ratings are going to go down eventually. And if you want to increase it, you need to put more money into the infrastructure. But we'll find all that out once the pavement management is done.
So the pavement management plan is being done by a consultant, is it?
Yes. Beta Group is doing our pavement management, and they should be starting within a month.
There was a van actually at the MMA annual meeting that would just drive around the streets and spit out a plan somehow.
Yep, they do inventory every single road in town to make sure that they give us a good idea of what we have and what our distresses are in town.
As long as you're there, it's time for you guys to talk about pavement or
I'll let you start, Chief.
traffic calming. The selectmen had an email from a resident of Gun Hill, was it? That was looking to have traffic calming, speed bumps or speed humps installed to try to get people to slow down on Gun Hill. And then a discussion ensued with the chief.
So where Mo and I have arrived at is that the first thing is Mo has some ideas of how to get some things done. He and I have sat last fall and decided that one of the first things we need to do is we need a bit of a process, because typically what's been happening is that a lot of things come from the mind of Bob, and there probably needs to be some more people with input. So as opposed to receiving one particular complaint and my going out and try to deal with it, which is usually by putting officers up there doing traffic enforcement, see if there's some signage that I can do. You probably notice the solar traffic signs around town in different places to give feedback to the drivers as to how fast they're actually going. That's pretty much what I do. So we sat down and discussed that we should probably have a process so that when a complaint or a concern comes in, we're responding to it in an appropriate fashion. The response is evidence-based, not just taken a guess at what might be a good thing to do. And so that there's a process that everybody can understand. So that when you folks get complaints, you hand it to us, and then we put it into the system. We're probably, it probably involves things such as data collection, such as volumes, speeds, time of the day, road conditions, what part of town is it? Is there a specific situation that's aggravating the problem that may not be related to just the cars going down the street? So things of that nature. The simpler things, you know, I just deal with by doing traffic enforcement, put the radar trailer out. I don't know if any of you have received feedback on a, you know, an individual basis, but I know that when the, you know, the radar signs on Brook Street and up on Hospital Road and down by South Street have gathered a lot of positive comments. The one on Dale Street disappeared last November at some point. I'm not sure where it is, what bar it might be in, or what dorm room it might be in. But, and the people down there were devastated. They thought that I'd moved it, and that, you know, that was all the time they got. I'm like, no, I didn't move it. And it was when I was away. So it took a few days to figure out that, no, it was stolen. So that's one response I can do, but that's at $3,800 per response. But I know that as part of like the Hospital Road plan, there's going to be another one of the signs put up there, because, you know, I'm up there often enough because I'm up checking the hospital, and I know that going from 40 to 25 miles an hour, it usually flashes at me quite quickly because I'm going about 36. So what I'm thinking of doing there is going from 40 down to 35 or 30, then down to 25, so that by the time you get to the corner, people are going at an appropriate speed. So some of the complaints we have currently are down by Gun Hill, that people going into the Gun Hill, Wood End Lane, Country Way neighborhood are going too fast. That's one area we have complaints. Also have complaints from Winter Street. Winter Street, what that appears to be is a cut-through where people are coming home from the north part of town, and, you know, they're using Winter Street to get to Flintlock Green in that area. Similar problem on Pine Street in the area of Summer. You go around the corner and then you have the straight stretch, and people pick up speed there as they go down to the intersection of the Winter. And then also in the area of 259, 260 South Street, they're just speeding in general down there. There's one place where it's on a corner and the person backing out of their driveway, it gets a little dicey for them sometimes. So we have some places that we're looking at, and some of the things I can easily deal with. I throw out traffic enforcement. I did traffic, we had the officers sitting on Gun Hill, and the response was, it was great while you were there, and then when you drove away, the speed picked up again, which is, yeah, I get that. So, you know, we have a process, and Mo actually had some discussions with the people from Westwood, because they've done some different things over there with speed humps, speed bumps, and the dips to try to deal with the traffic that comes from this part of the world heading towards 128 and uses High Rock as a cut-through. So the other thing they did over there too is to try to define the problem even better, is they read license plates and figured out where the vehicle owners are driving from. So they knew it wasn't people just in the neighborhood, they knew it was folks out, you know, further west from Westwood who were doing most of the
Chief Hurley
offenses.
did that on Indian Hill Road and discovered that it was us, that we were it was the
Yeah.
Medfield residents who were speeding.
Yeah, when you get a typical defined neighborhood where there's, you know, a couple ways in, couple ways out, and maybe there is a main road that passes through, such as Pine Street passes through some of the neighborhoods up there, you know, I agree that it's probably not people in Medfield trying to get to Dover Center, because that, once you get out of Medfield, Pine Street crushes like this, and if you're trying to make some time getting from point A to point B, that's really not going to help you. So a lot of it does tend to be local. The other interesting thing that I read that Westwood had is, you know, my first reaction is you do enforcement. You do it enforcement/education because you try to give warnings initially so that people aren't hit with the fines. But one of their goals is to get people to slow down without having to use extensive amounts of traffic enforcement, to have people simply comply with what the speed limits are. And then we've got that whole situation that's also occurred where the state has said, you know, you've got some specific areas, you can drop the speed limit to 25 miles an hour. You know, that obviously would not work in all parts of Medfield. People would go crazy trying to drive 25 miles an hour down 109. But, you know, you do something like in the congested areas, the central business districts, someplace, yeah, that might be an idea too. So we've come up, you know, between the two of us with a lot of different things that we'd like to research and present to you as more of a plan as to how we want to do this. You know, in the immediate future, I just keep doing my, well, not me, the patrol personnel keep doing their enforcement. And, you know, I work at it from that way. And if there's some signage that may help in some parts of town, that's okay. But I will say that I think most signs are effective for about 5 to 7 days. And then it's just another yellow and black blur on the side of the road. The exception to that, and I really don't want to jinx myself, but I will say it, is on 109 by Peak House. The flashing light that indicates the curve in the road. Since we've put that up, I think we've had less issues with people going around the corner and ending up on lawns and in trees. We had a fatal crash down there 2 years ago in the fall and whatnot. And so that has lessened considerably. So judicious use of signs of that nature in some places, when you can define what the issue is, that's probably it seems to be an appropriate solution. But that doesn't work everywhere. I mean, I noticed that there are some communities that have started highlighting a lot of their stop signs with the red LEDs, and unless we had an intersection where it's a 4-way stop or a 2-way stop, and we had large numbers of crashes, and we go down there and the officers are being told by the people, I didn't see the stop sign, time after time, well, maybe you do that. But other than that, I'm really not, I don't want to make this, make the town into a lighted sign community. Judicious use where appropriate, yes, but just everywhere because it feels good, looks good, it's responsive. I'd rather have it be practical and realistic and actually solve the problem. So part of it is we're giving the information, and part of it is we're telling you that we've come up with a lot of things that, you know, Mo and I would like to go over and probably present to you in a little bit in writing first so you can digest it, read it, see what it is, and then proceed from there with it. So part of it I'm giving you an answer, and part of it, quite honestly, I'm pushing you off a bit to say that we'd like to come up with something in writing to present to you in a more formal manner.
Good. I'd love to have get a process set up so that we're not having an ad hoc response every time it comes up.
And that is pretty much what we do have.
Yep. The other thing that I've been having in my mind ever since the Municipal Modernization Act was the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit that is
Right.
now available to the town to create. In the past, the town couldn't really enact lower speed limits because you had this process where you had to check to see how fast everybody was going, and you could only set it at what 85% of the people were going, and that was usually more than we wanted. But now we can just come out and say 25 miles an hour, and so that, I guess my question is, should we be coming up with a plan for the town as to how to change the speed limits? Like, the one that occurs to me is on Hospital Road, just because I'm familiar with that area because I live there. And with the development of the new 40B there, it makes much more sense to me that the 25 mile an hour should start on the other side of the 40B project rather than down into the residential neighborhood near the bad corner on Harding. It seems to me that it might make sense to have a plan for looking at the whole town and
Right.
seeing where it makes sense to have the 25-mile-an-hour speed. Can we do 35-mile-an-hour speed limits too if we want to?
I think the legislation mentioned 25, and I
Yeah.
think that's what they're looking for.
If you can go to 25, I would assume you could go to 35. Well,
Yeah, I think with the,
we need our attorney.
well, I think the 25 is fine because they said you could do that. And I would probably do that like around the center of town because it makes perfect sense. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't want people traveling faster than 25 miles an hour from, say, for instance, Brook Street or South Street, all the way through to maybe Causeway. And you go up somewhat on North Street, maybe go a little bit south, Pleasant, Miller, Oak, that sort of thing. And that's where we're going to do a little bit of a discussion of, for instance, the crosswalk out here by Janes Avenue, where maybe that's a place where we try something that's at least painted substantially differently to make it look all brick, or maybe you do something raised and give an indication, okay, you've now entered the central business district of Medfield. Slow down. I think things of that nature, because part of it, I know this is a little bit contradictory statement, you also have to consider the motorists, and we have to set our regulations at what is reasonable and practical for people to do, so that we get voluntary compliance without beating people over the heads with traffic citations. And the other thing that was discussed last year, perhaps not here, but Maurice and his crew have started, are the crosswalks on Green Street, because Green Street was reconstructed. And if you notice, you go up there today, they've ground them out, and now a mixture is going to be poured in that's dyed.
It's a concrete mixture that's imprinted like brick. They haven't, a lot of towns are doing regular brick, and they found they pop up all the time during the winter, they heave and everything. The brick that we're doing is one piece that's poured and imprinted. They've had a lot of success with it over the years. We have about 3 or 4 locations on Green Street that we're preparing ourselves. The contractor's gonna be coming in, probably not next week because of the rains, but possibly by the week after to be kind of the test pilot for the town. And once we reconstruct all the major roadways around the center, and we might look into something similar to that as well. So,
But that's, another tactic of traffic calming. When I was in New Zealand, what you would find in the midst of, like, going down to Green Street, is all of a sudden there's this island-like effect that goes from one side of the road to the other, and you go in and you make a turn. And if you try to go through it too quickly, your rims are gonna get bashed and your tires are gonna go sailing off the rims. And it's extraordinarily effective. I don't know that we're there yet here. I think we've got some other things we could do first. But there are different ways to do it, where you restripe the road in different fashions to make the road narrower. You may notice that Route 27, coming Sherburne into Medfield, it seems like the lane is a little bit narrower and the breakdown lane is quite large, and that's because the lane is narrower. And sometimes you can give people the perception that there's less of a road to drive on. We did that with West Street when the project went up there to narrow the lanes. You probably wouldn't build a road as wide as West Street anymore. Under the complete street thing, you'd have lanes, you'd have bike lanes, you'd have sidewalks, you'd have the whole, that complete street package that you were talking about. So you wouldn't have a road as wide as West Street. You probably wouldn't have one as wide as Route 27 anymore either. You just wouldn't build it that way. You'd build it differently so that other modes of transportation feel that they're equal out there, that they're getting the same consideration as the vehicles. Because up until the 80s or the 90s, we were a very, very vehicle-based society. And you notice all the things going on in Boston with the pedestrian crashes, the bicycle crashes. They're trying to bring them in as, yes, they get to use the road too. So.
I looked up the speed limit for Municipal Modernization Act. It allows the selectmen to set a speed limit of 25 miles per hour on any roadway inside an area that's been designated thickly settled or a business district that is not a state highway. You can create a safety zone, and you can drop the speed limit to 20 miles an hour. Those are the only two speed limits you can utilize.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm just pretending I'm Mark since he's not
Yeah,
here.
we don't need a town council.
Thank you very
Oh,
much
that's
for your
gonna cost
input.
me.
Chief, Chief, I know there was a discussion a while ago, and I know one of the towns put speed bumps on one of their commuter roads, and you tested out, you actually felt it increased the speed rather than decreased it, because if you drove a certain speed, it smoothed out the bumps.
I did some authorized reconnaissance to find out how this works. And with a regular speed bump, usually the faster you go over it, the less you notice it, as long as your suspension system is working. If you try that with one of the raised crosswalks, or in another community where I work, there was a huge intersection by a school, and they raised the whole, the intersection was probably as big as this room, and the whole thing was raised up. If you tried speeding over that, you go up, you land, and you bounce, and you're off the road, or you're about 5 feet over from where you were. So, and that's where you also get into where I think if Mark Sorrell were here, I should not, I'm going to speak for him, so I'm not even going to apologize for it. But I think he would, he'd be saying that anything we put in the road that of the nature of a speed hump, bump, table, dip, whatever, can increase the town's liability. If a crash occurs because of that structure, we can be held responsible. He really doesn't even like, although I do him, I put the pedestrian signs up in the middle of the road by the crosswalk, the one out here by, Janes Avenue, and there's one down by where the crossing guard stands on South Street. I know he's not thrilled about those either. But, they're all plastic. They don't scratch cars. The one time I did have to pay damages, someone had intentionally put the thing on its side in the roadway, because you have to do that. You can't just knock it over. And then a car drove over it. And so I paid the damages for that one. And it's also a part of, there's a little bit of risk on the part of the town, but what do you gain from it? So with pedestrian crosswalks, especially in congested areas, I'm willing to put the town a little bit at risk by putting something in the middle of the road, but the high gain is less chance of a pedestrian being struck because there's a sign right there saying there's a crosswalk, there might be a person here. So there's that aspect of it too. All things we should, look at, discuss, sort it out, present to you in a format that you can digest it, shred it apart as much as you want, ask us questions, and see what we come up with. The end result being a process. So then when somebody has a complaint, here's how you file a complaint, and here's the process it's going to go through.
Yep, good.
Do we have any speed bumps on roads in town now?
We do not, just within the schools, I believe. And there's a few on the hospital property.
Yeah,
Some unintentional.
off-road, I meant on
Yeah,
regular
right.
traveling roads.
Correct.
So I got sounds like a happy email from Mr. Halfpenny this afternoon. I think, Pete, you got it as well. It sounds like the conversation was a good one, and I'm trying to figure out what it was you told him that made him happy.
Well, I think part of it was just that we're going to have this discussion.
So that's, okay, so he's happy about that, okay.
So we're going to have the discussion, but I think he'd really like to have the speed bump.
Yeah, so I live across from Keith.
Okay, all right. I was wondering if you were one of the neighbors, right?
So to let the people at home hear you, could you use the microphone, please? Thank you.
Yeah, so I live at 4 Gun Hill Road. Keith is at 1 Gun Hill, and I'm here speaking on his behalf tonight. So I'm sure, I think he said you went down there and checked it out.
Yep, he and I went down yesterday afternoon and took a look at it.
So the neighborhood funnels down. The only access points to the neighborhood funnel down 2 big hills. His driveway is a blind driveway around a corner, and mine is across the street. I have a vantage point of both kind of roads coming in. We both have 3 kids under 5 years old. We don't have fences in the front of our yard. He works from home most of the time, so he sits in an office that faces the road, and he can see cars flying by there. I mean, I see them too. I mean, they're going like 40 miles an hour. This is like an insular neighborhood. It's no cut through. So we're just trying to figure out, there's no speed bumps in town, I can hear that, but is there any process? I mean, what kind of process would it take to get something put in like the High Rock in Westwood? I mean, I really do think it might be necessary. I mean, does it take like the neighborhood getting signatures? Does it take like
All that. So it is a process, and to do it the right way, You need to first have an engineering study to see what type of volume, what type of speed that's going and what times. Once there's a lot of criteria that's involved with these, there's certain requirements such as sight distance. Having where we go on to Gun Hill from Millbrook, I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 to 200 feet of sight distance before you get to a speed hump. So it has to fit certain criteria coming from both directions. You need a petition to come, so many signatures. I think that's depends on the town of how many signatures they would require. The study would have to be taken place. There has to be pre-warning signs put up on Millbrook in both directions if it was to be on Gun Hill. There would have to be signs from MUTCD requirements that you would have to have signs at least 7 feet high and very vibrant signs on either approach at the speed bumps. Okay, so, and then there has to be a public hearing of all residents that are in that area to discuss it, whether it's for it or against it, to see what the public perception is.
Right.
So there is a process. It's not just throw it in there and hopefully everything turns out okay. Personally, I'll have to admit that I'm all for traffic calming, but I believe that the application for a speed hump in subdivisions, I don't believe that's the proper application. I think there's other alternatives to begin with. And I know your situation, and I agree that there's a need around the whole town. But if you do decide to put a speed hump in subdivisions, then it opens the door for every subdivision to have these speed humps, which is going to be costly in the long run for, I talked to the Westwood guys. The reason why they put the speed humps on High
Rock, yeah.
is that it was to deter traffic from cutting through. It wasn't in a subdivision. And they are deterring people from putting it into subdivisions in Westwood.
Right.
Doesn't mean that's the case here, but I would rather see something else, because if everyone in town starts to come out to put speed humps in, it makes it very difficult, first of all, to pay for them, because we would have to come up with the money. Westwood had to go out for a town meeting to appropriate the money. We would have to do the same depending on how many speed humps were accepted in the town.
Right.
And then it does cut down on, there's a lot of reasons, whether it's emergency personnel trying to get down, snow and ice. It might not be a big deal with 2 speed humps in town to plow, but if you do it in multiple subdivisions, the time it takes to sand or plow does get cut down. And I'm not arguing the point, but it's just that I'm not a big fan in the subdivisions, but I do agree that some kind of traffic calming could be.
I mean, I've seen a patrol vehicle there one time. I mean, there's no signage at the moment saying any speed limit. Keith actually put like a big orange like children slow down sign, and it was crushed by a car.
So but I think when it comes from the neighborhood itself, people realize that it is from the neighborhood, not from the town, or not a regulated thing. Right. I think there are different avenues to take, such as a radar speed sign. It does show people, and they do react.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that's going to end all, but like I said, I think the chief and I would like to discuss things further and try to come up with a plan to present and see what your thoughts are.
Sure. All right. Thanks.
I appreciate you guys doing that, and getting us a process that we can then replicate whenever the issue comes up, so thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Any further questions from?
Thank you.
Thanks.
We're back to discussing legal restrictions on influencing a ballot question.
Mark had wanted to put this on the agenda. He and I had talked about it. He's not here this evening, but I did forward to all of you the Proposition 2.5 ballot question information. And the Board of Selectmen are allowed to take a position on the override vote that'll be at the special election, but you cannot expend any public resources. So Mike and I cannot advocate or talk against the override. Basically, we can only give information out about when and where the override will be, no opinion as to the actual override. So just the discussion that we can't spend any local resources, no taxpayer money can be spent to advocate or against the override. Mark would have given you a much longer-winded discussion of that.
The thing I found very frustrating about a debt exclusion override is the state does not allow you to put the amount of money that the bond is for. You cannot put that in the ballot question because they say, well, you don't know what the interest rate's going to be, you don't know what the annual cost will be, therefore you cannot put it on the ballot. Now, they may have eased up somewhat, allowing you to put it on explanation. One point, you could not put it in the explanation. So people would go and they'd say, well, how do I know how much I'm voting for? Why don't you put the amount in there? And you'd say, well, we're not allowed to put it in there. Now, you can on an operating override because that's a fixed amount of money. On a debt exclusion, the state's position is because you don't know the interest rate, you don't know what the actual amount, annual amount's going to be. So.
Can I ask who initiated that? How did that issue get on our agenda?
Mark and I had a discussion about it. We try to have that discussion because it's a new board since we've had our last override, so we just thought we wanted to refresh everybody's memory on it. Yep, just informational.
Anything further on that?
Nope.
Next item is the Veteran Service Agent position and duties. We've had a couple emails from Ron Griffin, our current Veteran Service Agent, about this, and Ron had spoken at the annual town meeting to ask the budget to be amended to include the cost for a full-time Veteran Service Agent. And I guess, who's going to?
It's a very difficult issue because the caseload, as he stated himself in his memo, is declining. The number of veterans is declining, and yet the state law says that if you're over 12,000, you're required to have a full-time veterans agent.
And Ron's email today was that the state is starting to target the 17 communities that are non-compliant, so that we can expect some sort of state action.
If they're starting with the governor's town, though, it might be interesting to see what the governor does about it.
I did see that I asked town council what the penalty provision was, and he said it didn't appear that there was a penalty provision, except that they will not reimburse you the percentage, the 75% that you expend on veterans benefits under the state programs. Now the figures are around 25,000 that we pay out annually in veterans benefits, so you would lose 75% of that on your cherry sheet reimbursement. That appears to be. Now I assume when they crack down, they will come up with additional sanctions, and I don't know what the nature of those will be, but we are trying. I've tried to go through the schools. I've tried to go through other communities. I have a call into Walpole to see if they would be interested, although they had a bad experience with another neighboring town, so I'm not sure they'd be interested. Walpole is the only town that we abut that we could join with in a district, because the other towns we abut with are not required to have full-time veterans agent
But they might
because they're
still
under
be interested in
12,000.
sharing, even if they have a part-time.
I've contacted Millis to see if they would. They have a part-time veterans agent, to see if they'd be interested, and get no response. I spoke to Needham about a year and a half ago, and they we cannot, the way the law is written, in order to be part of a district, you have to be contiguous. Dover will not join the district, so we are not contiguous with the other towns in that district, and therefore we cannot join that district without Dover being in it. So we're kind of hamstrung.
There's no other way to connect?
No.
So we ran some scenarios today. One of the things, and why the school option wouldn't work, is that you cannot designate somebody as the veteran service officer who is also serving in another full-time role. So we couldn't have a teacher also be the veteran service officer. You can hire a full-time veteran service officer and assign them other tasks not related to the veteran services, but they cannot hold any other full-time title within the town hall.
And that was the route that I gather that Ron had suggested to the warrant committee, which was that we have a full-time veteran service officer and have them provide other services to the town. I know that he had suggested to me that if we had a female social worker who was a veteran, that would be the ideal candidate, because a lot of, I think what he does as a veteran service officer is akin to social work, and he thought that that would be useful to the town.
I think under our hiring practices, I could only require the person to be a veteran. I could not
Sure, yeah, no,
require.
absolutely.
But I think we'll have to make a decision if we're going to create a new position to replace Ron's that will be designated tasks other than veteran services within the town hall.
Well, Ron's leaving at the end of
Mhm.
June this year, so that, do we do anything this year, or do we just,
And we only become non-compliant when he leaves. We're in compliance now.
Not technically, we are. We're not
So
technically.
he's not
Well, doesn't it
full-time.
say that it's only, because he's not
Well,
full-time,
they
right?
sent us a letter right when we had hired him that we should have gone to full-time when we hired Ron as part-time.
Oh,
and
okay,
he
so
was
we
able
were
to-
already over 12,000 when we hired him. I see, because
He was able to work out a deal that,
Okay.
with the work he was doing, they
I
could leave
think
it
they
at part-time.
realize the quality of services that
Correct.
Medfield offers to its veterans, not just through the state programs, but in general. So they kind of didn't lean on us too hard. But now that he's leaving, it's hard, as he said, the number of veterans in town are declining. We put out feelers. I thought we had one of that young woman that we offered the position in the police department. She would have been a veteran, but she opted to stay with the Coast Guard. They made her a better deal, and she ended up not taking the job in our police department. Now, according to what Chris says, we couldn't hire her anyway because she'd be a full-time police officer. Although some of the towns, they have a deputy fire chief. I mean, how do they do it? I think they have to realize that, I think our caseload is 3 right now. And that's been declining for a number of years. And as is the number of veterans. And the program has income guidelines, so you don't get a lot of people that actually qualify for it. Now, there are other programs that are offered to veterans through the Valor Act that was just passed. They can apply for abatements through the assessors office and other programs like that through the federal government. He assists with getting grave markers when a veteran is deceased, other things like that. And of course, the Veterans Breakfast that he sponsors, that's sponsored by the Legion, the Memorial Day events. So it is a pretty full program, but it's hard getting someone to take it. You do have to take an exam now. Traditionally it used to be whoever was, you get someone out of the American Legion or the VFW hall. But now they have to pass an exam and maintain certification.
What's the focus of the exam?
What's what?
What is the focus of the exam? Veterans
The
programs?
the programs that they offer, yeah.
I mean,
I
Ron-
don't think it's a particularly difficult process, but it is time, you have to go for a couple of days for training and whatnot.
I think Ron was remarkably useful to people in town because he was trained as a Shine volunteer to begin with, so that he knew the Medicaid and Medicare programs and Mass Health very well.
Well, one of the problems, he talked about having a social worker, or combining it, maybe making it a Shine counselor. The Council on Aging has a social worker affiliated with their staff. The outreach program has 2 social workers that deal with not just counseling, they deal with fuel assistance program and housing assistance and whatnot.
I think that was part of.
Schools
I think
have
that-
social workers.
I think that was part of Ron's suggestion, was that perhaps the Council on Aging and the youth outreach people are dealing with more than is easy for them, and that it would be useful to have this veteran service person do some of that sort of, like the fuel assistance or some of the other programs that the Council on Aging and the Youth Outreach sign people up for, that you don't necessarily have to be a social worker to do, but,
But you have to be a veteran, and that's.
oh, for the veteran service officer
Yes,
position,
yeah.
yeah.
And that's the difficult part. Finally, we put out feelers to the veterans organizations. Through the school, there was a teacher that was called up to duty, but Chris says you can't use there either because she's full-time teacher, so. It's
Well,
hard.
But if we hired them full-time, Mike, we could use them to assist the Council on Aging and the Youth Outreach, which I think was a plan that made sense to me.
Well,
As
I mean,
long
I'm
as
talking
you're
to the
not just
council.
adding, as long as you're not just adding a position to just simply throw more money at labor, we should
Right.
reconfigure the job in
Yeah.
a way that would actually say, well, there's a way we're doing it right now, or there's an open slot, and maybe there is an unfilled need. But the idea of just kind of pretending that there's a bigger job because
I
the
think there's
state's
an,
requiring us to spend money that we don't need to spend money on.
absolutely.
We
But I
need to
think-
find a
Yep.
far more creative way of doing it
Yeah,
than
I
that.
think there's a need, so that, I mean, that's,
I think
And-
there's
and
a
we need
need
to
that's
verify
being
that
met
for
by
sure,
the
but,
Council on Aging. They have a social worker, they have staffing, they have an outreach worker that does home visitations. So they have a couple of people that are funded to address that. And I think it addresses the peculiar needs of the seniors, just as the outreach worker tends to address more the needs of families and young people. So you have to find a way to integrate it into something that is designed around veterans services, but where do you slot it in?
Mike,
Well-
do you know does the state specify the salaries for halftime? Because I heard an interesting story about how little some halftime veterans agents are paid in some towns. And so we've been, I think, legitimately paying people a halftime salary for what's at most a halftime job. But that raised the question for me, what does it take to have someone pay, have a full-time position? Does it actually specify the salary that's for that, or is it just, you say, it's a full-time position and
You have to
this is what
find,
we
you
pay?
have to find someone willing to take it at whatever salary level you offer 'em.
Yeah.
That's the
Are you
problem.
asking salary versus number of hours?
Well, if this is an artificial requirement from the state to have to fund this, and we're saying there isn't a job that really, the demand for this specific job, no way, shape, or form justifies it. I'm not about playing the game right back that says, okay, it's a full-time job, you get paid
15,000
something
a year.
Yeah, or, well, I wouldn't drop it from where we are probably, but you get paid what we get paid, it's full-time. And, you need to manage your time and be available at times that it's most important. And if that's what it takes to meet the administrative requirements of the state on a silly requirement, then we're trying too hard to solve this the right way.
Well, I have some staffing equity issues then. It becomes an issue of,
Well,
If you're paying people a certain salary to work 37 and a half hours a week, and you're paying someone the same salary to work 5 hours a week, it
well,
doesn't.
I'm not saying it's a full-time
10
job.
hours a
I'm just
week,
saying
yeah.
the way it
We're
gets
paying a
managed
$10,000.
is, as it is now, I think, Ron, and I'm not suggesting he's not doing a halftime job,
Right.
but he's on call for a good part of the, he has regular hours, and then he's on
He
call
does,
the rest of
yes.
the time.
Right, yeah.
Um,
And he does a terrific job. I mean, he really runs a great program, so that's the sad part about losing him, because it was a program that really worked for the veterans.
the staff equity there is that you tell someone that they have a full-time job and you pay them at a low rate, they understand it's a pretty easy full-time job. So it's not like we're paying them the high rate and it's only a half. In fact, actually, the equity should be more paying them the kind of a number that we were talking about for a full-time salary on a job that has 3 people being serviced. And compare that to the town clerk's job, and it's pretty close. I know which one I would rather spend my time doing. So,
Maybe we could sign Carol up for the Marines.
the big, in talking with Ron, there's one way of answering this, which is structural. There's another way of answering it, which is, do we actually have a candidate? This is, intended to be something that would be of benefit to a veteran, I think our first preference would be to look inside town to see if there was a veteran.
Yeah.
I asked Ron that question, and at least at first blush, he didn't say no. What he said was that the kind of person you need to do this, it's not merely that they're a veteran, but they have to have, these are my words, they have to have the compassion to be willing to make the effort to help veterans that would benefit from programs that are complex and, difficult to navigate.
I think that's one of the things that makes Ron so good at his position is he's a very empathetic person.
Right.
He
Yes.
goes above and beyond what's required.
Plus, he was the Sean counselor for a number of years also, so.
So he's
familiar
hugely
with it.
knowledgeable.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that also suggests that if there was a way to bundle a half-time that role and a half-time in that social work outside of the veterans, as long as
Yeah.
we need it,
Maybe we need
then
to
that
get
would be a
together.
nice thing to do if we could find the right person.
I'll give Roberta a call and see if the council could find some way to fit something in there and find someone who would qualify under the state guidelines, that's willing to take an exam and to commit themselves to it, so. One of the problems, if you advertise, if you can't find anyone in the town and you advertise, you have to advertise for a full-time position. And you list the salary.
Hmm.
I don't think you get much response. Well, we'll keep working on it. It's.
I mean, I think the other way to do it would be to identify some suite of personnel needs the town would have. I mean, it could be as an additional social worker. I mean, I think you're probably threading a very, very small needle to say you're gonna find a veteran who wants to be a veteran service officer who's also a social worker or wants to be a social worker.
And a Shine counselor. That's
Right, I mean,
it's
that's
very
a pretty specific, but if you had sort of a handful of different potential roles, I mean, let's say that for whatever reason, that you're not gonna be able to advertise the full-time job at the same salary as you had as a part-time job. But if there were a handful of genuine needs for work, where you say, well, I could have somebody doing X, Y, and Z, it could be in accounting, it could be in any number of areas, you could advertise the job for a full-time veteran service officer paying and put these other tasks potentially that would be a part of it. It wouldn't have to be all of them, but at least then you would have somebody, if you're gonna have to pay the $50,000 for it, who would be picking up some genuine need, genuine work, whether it's, it could be somebody who's like a part-time deputy to Jerry McCarty or whatever else the position.
That's what we were talking about.
Whatever else the position is, that you might have somebody who, okay, I'll be the full-time veteran services officer. Maybe most of their time's not going to be spent on that stuff, but they fulfill the statutory requirement, and we're getting useful work in addition to it. And then I think most people, there aren't that many people who would want to take the job and then not really be that busy.
Ron did mention that one of the things, I think it was Westwood, was the one that, he said that the second role they created was actually a procurement manager. And that's, we don't have one, but.
Well, we do.
Well.
She's a veteran, but not of the military. Yeah, I think my understanding is what they do there, the procurement officer does all the work, but she is not the veteran service officer. They have another veteran service person who is a veteran, who's a veteran service, I think. But I'm not positive, that could change, yeah. Well, see, that's what happens in some cases. You'll have a veteran service officer who qualifies as a veteran, and they will have a clerical position working with them to do the actual work. That works if you have enough of a caseload. In our case, we don't have that big a caseload. So, well, we'll keep working at it and see what we can come up with. And it's tough.
You're watching Medfield TV, community shows.